Today at the post office a woman jumped on my lap, farted, laughed and said, "That's 1-0 me," then said, "Oops, sorry, I thought you were my husband," and walked off. What's the strangest encounter you've had with the opposite sex? I was standing in a bar talking with a friend, and a girl walks in with a midget. This isn't a joke. She immediately comes right up to us and starts dancing like a stripper, like full on rubbing all over her body, swinging her head around. For a good minute and a half. It was pretty awkward. I just stood there drinking my beer, kind of watching her. Didn't want to be rude. When she's finished she asks, "Is your name Kevin?" We both say no. She says sorry, leaves and starts drinking with her midget guy friend. This still confuses me. Similar story, was sitting on the bus when a woman in her 40s got on. I was about 14 about that time, made direct eye contact with me, got to where I was sitting and sat on my lap. The weirdest 5 seconds of my life, for she kinda just sat there until I wiggled a little and she went "OMG so sorry" and sat somewhere else. I was waiting for my wife to come out of the drugstore when an older woman who I didn't know got into my car, passenger side. I didn't say anything for a few seconds when she started talking to me about some random thing. She went on for a bit and I finally spoke up. She had been riding with another female, so when I talked she freaked. She didn't apologize or anything, just jumped out of the car and bolted. Her daughter was also driving a silver sedan. Too funny. I love how you just let her carry on just to see how far you'd get. Exactly what I would have done. Priceless. Walking to Walmart. Some chick asked me, "Am I RS for showing you my tea?" I just stared in confusion. She flashed me, then her boyfriend called me a F and they walked away making fun of me. When I was a SAP in my first year at university, I was putting sugar in my coffee when suddenly I feel 2 female hands caress my back, move up my side slowly, and then wrap completely around me. At this moment, I didn't say anything and just enjoyed it for a few seconds. Then when I felt it was necessary, I turned around and she gave me this huge WTF face and quickly ran over to her table where her friends were cracking up. TLDR. Doesn't matter. Got hugged. Me and my cousin were at the airport and went to take a leak in the toilets. When we were coming out, this old lady confronted us and started hitting us with her handbag as to why we were in the ladies' toilets. We explained to her that this is the men's and she wouldn't believe us until we showed her the urinals. She gave us a sweet each and apologized. My girlfriend farted on me while we were laying down in bed spooning. I thought she was asleep and let it slide, but then she said, "I can't believe you're just laying there and taking it." I'm on my phone so I apologize for any errors. 7th grade. Got invited to a party where everyone was drinking. This happened to be my first time drinking, so I only sipped my beer. 2 of my neighbors, we'll call them Jill and Jane, are smashed. 7th grade. Falling down, slurring, wasted. Everyone is leaving the basement to go outside when Jill and Jean say, "Hey Gottef and Bubba, want to see our special dance?" Being somewhat attracted to both of them, I nodded and sat down. Cue the horror show. They both start drunkenly dancing around each other, and every time they did a particular interesting move, there was a weird farting sound I'd never heard before. This continued for about a minute, and then they initiated the finale, a running jumping into each other's arms hug, accompanied by a weird, squishy fart noise. I sat in stunned silence watching, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. They both looked at me smiling goofily, until I managed to ask them how they were making those fart noises. They excitedly explained to me that they could fart out the front as well as the back. Only until a year later did I realize what I had seen. TLDR. I watched 2 drunk girls perform a ceremonial queef dance. Every once in a while I find a story that redefines my collective human experience. This is one of those stories. I was visiting a friend at Barnard in NYC. Because it's an all-women school, the dorms are, of course, all women. Nevertheless, they had the decency to put 1 bathroom on each floor that is co-ed, so that it may be used by male guests. One would presume that, when there are, say, 5 bathrooms that are female only, and 1 that is co-ed, that the co-ed bathroom is essentially a men's room. Nevertheless, the whole time I was staying, I was very careful to maintain strict standards of privacy. In any event, I was showering in one of the shower stalls. To understand this story, you need to understand the architecture of said stall. It's basically like this. Shower, space to change, with the being a plastic curtain, and the being a door with no lock but that stayed shut. Anyhow, there I am, showering away, when I hear what sounds quite a bit like the door to my stall being opened. Nevertheless, I'm not too concerned, as, upon opening the door, a person would see the water coming down, see my clothes and towel, and hear the shower, and would know that the stall was occupied. Moreover, I let out a little hello there cough. About a minute passes with no sound other than the stall door closing, so I figure our mystery person has departed to greener and less occupied showering pastures. Instead, the curtain is swept aside and a completely naked girl steps into the shower. She puts her hand on my shoulder and looks up at me. I'm frozen mid-shampooing, then says "You're not Mark" and runs out of the stall, leaving her clothing behind. I made no response, and I finished showering like a boss. I used to have hair down to my thighs, dyed various vibrant colors. I ended up chopping it off due to the general populace not understanding personal space. People would just walk up and touch it all the time without even asking me. I was working at a store, talking to a customer, when suddenly from behind someone grabbed my ponytail and yanked it so hard I fell backwards. My whole head was hot and screaming in pain and my neck was numb. By the time my head had cleared, I could see my assistant manager and our associate sitting on a guy who was screaming behind me. I just wanted to see if it was real. We called the cops and I had to file a report for being assaulted at work. Seriously uncool. I hope he was subject to catapult. While waiting to cross the street after work, a teenage girl grabbed my arm and asked if she could go home with me. The walk signal came on a second later, so I said sorry, no, and crossed the street. You were just in a scene of a Lifetime movie. In a bar, some guy ran up to me, squeezed my butt. I turned around, and he said, "OMG, so sorry, thought you were someone else," and ran away. Another time, I was staying at a friend's house, sleeping on her floor, and I woke up to this guy's face in my face about to kiss me. Then he realized I wasn't his GF. Hilarity ensued. My girlfriend is a nice, respectable woman. I rarely hear her cuss or make any off-color jokes. Her upbringing, I suppose. This all goes out the window when she plays Mario Kart. I have never been called a queer sucker before. My GF pantsed me in the middle of class once, and got more than just my pants. My dong was out for the world to see, and I didn't give a crap. In the face of embarrassment, Diddy Laux feels only pride, for his member hangs with fearlessness and the portrayal of raw power. My ex-girlfriend loved to hold my hose while I was taking a leak, had terrible aim, tough, almost made me pee my pants on several occasions. She also wanted to shave my face, but based on her poor performance of handling my manly tasks I had to politely decline. I would have bled to death, I am pretty sure. Goddamn. I read that as, hold my nose, at first. I reread it 5 times before I figured out how in the frick holding your nose would make you pee your pants. Sitting in an AMC theater to see Iron Man 2. It was opening night and completely sold out, so there weren't any open seats between people. I'm black, and happened to sit near a black couple. At one point during the movie, the woman got up for one reason or another, and a few minutes later the man left too. I don't know if she didn't realize he'd left or just wasn't thinking, but when she came back, she sat down in his open seat and immediately shoved her index finger, dripping with butter, into my ear, while whispering "butter train." I recoiled instantly and just looked at her in shock for a moment before she realized her mistake and apologized loudly enough to attract angry glares from around the theater. She handed me a napkin, slid over into the next chair and was quiet the rest of the evening. I think she intended to lick it out of my lobe and I sort of wish she'd finished the job, because one napkin wasn't nearly enough. That is so freaking gross. I was standing in line at Chick-fil-A and an elderly man came up to me, took me in his arms, put his face about an inch from mine and said, "What did one eye say to the other eye?" Me, I don't know, old man, just between you and me, something smells. All of the customers and employees were staring with this WTF look on their faces, as did I. The old man just sat back down in his booth and drank his coffee. I got my lunch and ran out as fast as I could. You just got hugged by the funniest man on earth. I have to. 1. So I'm walking behind this chick who has a large book in her hand. I'm plugged into my iPod and the perfect picture of an Apple fanboy. She has quite a large swing to her arm and she whacks me in the ghoulies with that thick goddamn book. I crumpled where I stood. As I'm gasping for air, she turns around and realizes that she's basically maimed me for life. She skips back to me, in an annoying girl way, and profusely apologizes and starts rubbing my balls to make them feel better. They did feel better though, but it was weird. 2. I was in a club and this random drunk chick walks up to me, kisses me full on the mouth, thrusts her hand down my pants and tries to give me handy. I try to push her away but I dare not do it very forcefully because she has her hands on my dong and she's got nails. Finally the bouncer has to get her off of me. He patted me on the back sympathetically later. This happened when I was in Destin last week. I was walking up from the boardwalk ramp thing that goes down to the beach at like 11:30 p.m. with some friends when this group of 5 or 6 people around my age, I'm 16, are walking down the opposite direction. There's 3 girls in the group that's passing me, and as they pass me they all turn around and scream, "It's Evan." Note, I am not Evan. So they all run up to me and are hugging me and kissing me and shouting, "Evan, Evan, Evan." Then, one of the girls says, "If it's Evan, let's check his nipples." What? So these 3 girls pull off my shirt and start pinching and rubbing their hands all over my nipples. Then, one of them puts her mouth right over my right nipple and blows a raspberry. After this, one of their friends says, "Guys, that's not Evan," and they all hug me again and say goodbye. I never even found out who Evan was. Evan must have a dang good life. Hey, I actually have a story for this one. I'm contributing. Anyways, had just moved into a new apartment complex. I wasn't driving at the time as I was saving up for a car after my old one broke down. I was asked to come into work early to help out my co-worker who is also my friend. So he offered to give me a ride. When I say early, I mean 4 AM. So I was getting a ride at about 3:45 AM. So wanting to be ready, I threw on my hoodie and put my hood up as it was winter outside, and stood outside my door waiting. I had never seen my friend's car up to this point, but thinking to myself how many people are going to be pulling in at 3:30 in the morning, I ran to the first car that pulled in. I ran pretty fast as it was very cold outside. Got to the car and went to open the door. It was locked. So I did the thing where you kind of lean down to look in the window to let them know the car is locked, and when I looked in the window I was met with the face of a very young girl. I'm thinking maybe 19-20, who was looking terrified. I cannot even describe the look on her face, like it was beyond mortified, and she had her back to the door trying to be as far away from me as humanly possible. To be fair, a petite good-looking girl pulls into her apartment complex at 3 in the morning only to see a guy in black jeans and black hoodie with his hood up run towards your car. I'd have freaked too. Then I got scared and nervous because I wanted to explain, but how could I explain? She was in a car with the windows up. For some reason, not realizing you can still kind of hear fluently what a person is saying with the windows up, I decided my best course of action was to shout loud enough for her to hear. This, coupled with my nervous, added an extra pitch and notch to the volume level, so it sounded like I was screaming hysterically, "Sorry, wrong car," expecting a ride from my friend. At which point as well, one of the lights turned on in one of the apartments, so now I'm thinking I woke somebody up and I'm in the most awkward position of my life. Luckily, at this point my friend pulled in the driveway. I said in a much calmer, quieter voice, "That's my ride, sorry again," and took off running to his car. Spent the whole day at work nervous as crap I was going to come home to the police. A little follow up, nothing happened, and a few days later I was taking my garbage out and apparently she was as well. She looked at me kind of nervous like, and I attempted to explain again now that things were much more relaxed. Things have been good ever since. She's a pretty cool neighbor actually. Wife and I went into a bookstore and split up to look on opposite sides of a shelf. Ridiculous song came on the overhead with a crazy shredding guitar solo, so I decided to make the wife laugh and jumped out from behind the shelf and pulled my best rock star air guitar, eyes closed, biting a lip, face screwed up in concentration, one hand up in the air, the other around waist level, fingers flying furiously, really getting into it. I open my eyes, and it's not my wife. Just some young chick staring at me in confusion and fear. I stopped the antics, and we just kind of stared at each other blankly for a second. Then I turned on my heel and quickly walked away. Perfect socially awkward penguin. Christmas morning, we're all sitting around the tree unwrapping presents and such, when our front door opens and this woman walks in, takes off her coat and is blabbing about how cold it is outside. We are obviously perturbed by this sequence of events. 30 seconds pass and she finally looks up at all of us staring at her. Oh dear, and proceeds to nope herself out the door. A few minutes later, our next door neighbor comes over to apologize for his crazy sister-in-law's inability to remember what house he lived in. My wife was in labor and delivery, in bed after being in labor with our daughter for a few hours. She had this hot 20-year-old East Indian nurse that would come and out and check on her. She kept making odd, inappropriately long eye contact with me every time she did. When it came time for me to change into my scrubs, I realized I was commando as usually am, and realized this may be a problem since they are so thin. The nurse insists that I must change, as she's about to start pushing, and we may have to go to the operating room if she needs a C-section. So she took me to an adjacent room and draws the curtain for me. As I change, she pops her head back around the corner and gives me an "oops, forgot you were back here" story. I dismiss that as it's a hectic situation and think nothing of it. I return to my wife's side and she starts pushing. The nurse is in front of me kind of checking my wife or whatever, and I'm behind the nurse talking my wife through it over her shoulder. The room is crowded. The doc, my wife's friend, me, the nurses are all crammed around the bed. Then, the nurse went for it. She reached back with her left hand and started rubbing my dong, all the while maintaining a conversation with my wife. "You're doing fine. Push. That's it now." At first I thought this isn't happening. She's made a terrible mistake, and is reaching for something and missing, grabbing my dong instead. She'll figure this out and stop. Don't say anything now in this most important moment. I'm my wife's life. Don't ruin it. But she never stopped. She got hold of my shaft and explored it. Then she looked over her shoulder back at me with my dong in her hand and said, "You're doing great." Back to my wife, "What a fantastic husband you have." That's when reality hit me. The blood was rushing. I'm in scrubs with no underwear, about to have a very serious and obvious problem, so I ran. I ran to the other side of the bed and hid from the nurse. I just looked at her like WTF and said nothing. I held my wife's hand and brought our baby into the world. I told my wife weeks later I should have had her fired, but didn't want to get involved in the whole scene it would create. TLDR. Labor and delivery nurse jerked me off in front of my wife while she was giving birth. When I was 19/20, I was being interviewed by Tom Arnold, who was struggling to figure out how to be funny. He finally started to try to go after me for not having a girlfriend when a girl I had never met before jumped on top of me to ruin Tom Arnold's jokes. I am so guilty. I was in a crowded store and walked up to what I thought was my husband. I gently put my hand out and grabbed his butt. As I was doing it, I remember thinking, he doesn't own flip-flops. I was able to push it off like I bumped into the guy, but the store clerk saw me and made a face. I then waited in the car. Since you're talking about farting, my stepdad was a Marine and Vietman, and he's full of lowbrow humor and the most awesome one-liners and crass sayings. One day I was helping him work on his pickup truck, and I let one rip that echoed through the garage. From under the truck I hear him say, "Keep talking, Lieutenant. We'll find ya." One of my housemates last year was on our school's rugby team, and sometimes he would bring his housemates, teammates, brain fart, over to party. When these dudes drink they turn really bro-ish, yelling rugby stuff, hugging. You know, all those repressed homoerotic urges come out. One thing they love to do is run up behind another player and jump on their shoulders. Well, one of them mistook me for a rugby player and jumped on my shoulders. I promptly collapsed on the gravel road with a 180-pound rugby player on top of me. But the pain of my injuries was nothing compared to the pain of being mistaken for a member of the rugby team. I am a girl. I was at a bar for a Halloween party. My friends and I were the gang from It's Always Sunny. I was Mac. I was just standing there, drinking my own business, when 4 girls dressed as S-Kiss walked by. One of them turns woo girl, just screams woo-hoo, chomp and just freaking bites my shoulder, then just walks away. No comment, nothing. I was sitting at the Greyhound station with a young friend of mine. We're talking about science and crap. Lady walks up and sits down on my luggage. We look at her as she lets out the largest, wettest, most horrifically long fart anyone has ever heard. She then starts crying and runs to the bathroom, but not before we see the huge brown-green stain on her dress, with liquids coming down and dripping. I cancelled the trip, sold the tickets, and threw my bag away, and never took Greyhound again. Never gamble on a fart. My dad did something similar to this a few years back. Him and my mom were in a bookstore shopping around. A woman comes walking down the aisle and stops right behind. Thinking that it's my mom, he backs up into her and farts on her. It wasn't her. I once walked up to this guy, who for some reason looked exactly like my ex from behind. But anyways, I put my arms around him from behind and even kissed him on the neck. To my surprise, it wasn't my boyfriend but a guy I sorta knew from high school. I was mortified. We were shopping at the market and I left my wife in the produce section while I went to the restroom. I walked back over and saw her bent over trying to get something from the bottom shelf. I put on my me Gusta face, firmly poked her from behind only to have a strange woman stand up, thank me for the surprise and point over at my wife who was looking on in shock. Not me, but it happened at the grocery store. I was walking behind some old couple. The wife darted off to the left to get something. The husband, this old guy, kept trudging on and ended up beside some other old lady who, when he looked over, must have thought it was his wife bent over reaching for something as he proceeded to pinch her butt. Haha. The other old lady shot up and turned around and that poor guy looked super embarrassed. He didn't say a word and scurried off ahead to catch up with his wife who had moved up a bit. Walking down a busy nightclub area in Hoi An, Vietnam, a woman steps out from behind a billboard and grabs my crotch, won't let go while talking rapidly in Vietnamese. I try to pry away her vice-like fingers but can't pull too hard. While she's doing this, another woman comes up behind me and grabs my butt. I know that something is wrong, but I'm too drunk to realize the obvious. I'm being robbed. All of a sudden both ladies stop and jump on two mopeds. One of them grabs the cash out of my wallet and tosses it over her shoulder as they drive away laughing. Maybe smarter than strange, but with so many people sharing crotch grabbing stories, I thought I'd add my own. I was at a bar in university, and I had just shown up. It was really cold outside, like -25, Canada. I had just checked my coat, and as I am heading to the bar, these two girls come up to me, throw their drinks in my face, and one of them slaps me and they just walk away after calling me an butthole. I have no clue who the frick they are, but I am not happy. So I go over to the bartender, whom I was good friend with, and ask for 2 pitchers of water. I walk up to the girls and dump the pitchers on both their heads. The bouncer is not impressed and kicks us all out. When we get outside and we are under the street lights, they are like, "Oh frick, you aren't who we thought you were." I'm like, no crap. Then I took them home and had a threesome. I transit to school for 2 hours every morning, so I've seen some interesting stuff. One gem happened a few days ago on the train. I was sitting there listening to music when a guy got on and took the seat right behind me. A while later, I felt a tickle on my neck. I have pretty long hair, and so I reached back and just brushed it aside. Thinking it had tickled me, I settled back in, then felt it again, and again. So I panicked a little, whirled around, and caught this little T yanking his hand away from the back of my head. I looked him in the eye and he was absolutely mortified. He turned bright red and got all stuttery before apologizing. I have no idea how long he'd been stroking my locks before he tugged enough for me to notice, but it was creepy as heck. He wisely left the train at the next stop. Completely disarmed by the first warm day of spring. Blue sky, grass is green, and nothing could be wrong in the world. As I am walking through the residential part of my small town, I come across 3 tweakers. One fat guy that hasn't seen a razor in his life. A skinny guy that hasn't showered or combed his hair in weeks are dismantling a couple of bikes. The third is a skinny girl sitting in a kitchen chair and an ankle-length dress. She positions herself so she can flash me her beaver as I walk by. I noped it right the frick out of there. A girl once apologized to my department for rushing to blame us for her freak up. Like, sincerely apologized. That was a year ago. I still don't quite believe it happened. It was surreal. Very soon there'll be a post saying today I farted on a man's lap thinking it was my husband. What the most embarrassing thing you've ever done, and this will come full circle. AskReddit is like a better Craigslist missed connections page. At college once some Asian chick came up to me and said I'm frisky, let's frick later. Then she realized it wasn't her boyfriend and ran away. Really embarrassed. I'm Asian and I guess we all look the same. FTFY. I went to a LGBT bar once. A girl came up to me and flashed her tea, then said to me, if you were straight, would you think these are hot? I was like, I am straight, and they're awesome. She looked shocked. TL. DR. Not everyone at a gay bar is gay. After I played a show with my band in New Orleans, we were hanging out and this chick next to me, out of nowhere, jammed her finger into my nose. I immediately opened my mouth in shock, and before I had time to process it or realize what was going on, she shoved her finger in my mouth and said, now we're friends. My nose started bleeding profusely a second later. I spent the rest of the night with a paper towel in my nose, hiding from her. On the 4th, I was hanging out on the dock. Some dude is sitting on a boat. He says to this chick that was walking in front of me, where have you been? We've been waiting half an hour on you. She points at me and says, making out with that guy. He looked her son at this point, her being an aging trophy wife type. I gave her a wink and a smile, and she flashed one of her fake boobs and smiled as they drove off. Not the weirdest, but most recent. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.